welcome to another edition of the Omnist Hour. Let's crank this down. I'm going to crank it down a little lower than usual to please some of my viewers who thought the music was a little bit overpowering. Today, we're going to talk about another spiritual celebrity, not a very nice one. I think that's going to be a lot of the focus of my talks from now on, is kind of looking at specific characters and where they fit in the grand scheme of things. I'll let you look at this picture behind me and take in what's going on here. Obviously two very well-dressed men enjoying the horse races together. Interesting looks on their faces. I don't know if you pieced together who they are yet, but this in fact is J. Edgar Hoover and his close, one might say perhaps too close associate, Clyde Tolson. Most of you have probably heard of J. Edgar Hoover. He was basically the guy that turned the FBI into the organization that we've grown to mostly hate in America. The man who I would say single-handedly created the deep state. Let's delve into this one. Might be a bit of a controversial one. Who knows? It may get me banned completely from this platform if I can ever post it. It's an interesting day I'm having today. The internet hasn't been working well ever since I pre-announced I was going to be doing this podcast on X. So read from that what you will. I'm hoping that I can record this and that I can successfully post it when the internet hopefully returns to normal. I mean, it's really been acting strange. It connects, disconnects, and then starts asking me to log into my network, which I shouldn't have to do because I have an ISP. That doesn't require a separate login, so something really strange going on here. At any rate, I'm going to call this one J. Edgar Antichrist, the Satanic spawner of the FBI. Maybe the spawner of the whole deep state, as I said. Okay, where am I going with that? Well, let's start with what prompted it. I've been kind of re-exploring the realm of gematria lately after running across a website from the post on a blogging site from Nigeria. And this Nigerian preacher posted that he had been doing some gematria research and had found a number of reasons why Chinese dictator for life, don't call him a fucking president, please, was perhaps one of the beasts of the apocalypse, maybe the beast. And he gave some rationalization for it. And I thought that was interesting. I did a little bit of confirmation and research on my own and confirmed what this preacher in Nigeria had found, and actually found a few more things that he missed to point out. And it got me to thinking about what are the kind of things I might find hidden within gematria. And well, long story short, lately on X, I don't know if you've been involved much there, but the normal political cycle is kicking in, and a lot of strange things are happening. The removal of Donald Trump from the ballot in my previous home state of Colorado, and excuse me, I had an allergy today and the pill's not quite working yet. The reaction that various folks are having to that, and the renewed talk of civil war in America, Civil War 2.0, they're calling it. And the narrative that they're trying to sell is that the Trump crowd are going to be so pissed off about trying to get Trump off the ballot that they're all going to take up arms and as the far left has taken up arms in defense of BLM, Antifa, and now Hamas, and are basically going to cause another civil war. And that's being actively sold now in commercial media. Meanwhile, sane people have realized that this is all a game, all a political psyop, and are rallying behind either RFK Jr. if they're left-leaning, or DeSantis if they're a little more right-leaning and care more about somebody who's actually had experience as an executive managing an organization as large as the federal government. Okay, so that's the backdrop of it. I got to thinking, well, how did we get here? What was like the defining moment of American dystopia, American Antichrist, if you will? And I, pretty much had to trace it back down to this man behind us, J. Edgar Hoover, who, if you've not researched, is a very interesting character. So let me, before I go into talking about his character, I would like you to explore what I found through playing with gematria. Now, those of you who know how the gematria game goes knows that it's rare to get an exact match for something you're looking for. And most of the better Antichrist theories have a bit of nuance to them. And mine certainly did too. Looking for a way to match up J. Edgar Hoover to a beastly association. And when I did, a lot of things started making sense, especially when I, after that, went in and reviewed a little bit of his career. I'd read a biography of him that was written after the FOIA request was released for more details of his time. A lot of what happened in the FBI during his era is still top secret, is still heavily redacted, but quite a bit of stuff was leaked out about, I think about 10 years ago or so, and became the basis for a round of new biographies. At any rate, I don't know which one I read, so I can't recommend that particular one, but you can go look for it on Amazon. At any rate, I got to messing around gematria, and at first I didn't find much of anything until I hit upon, I was looking for variations on J. Edgar. And I was curious, why does he go by J and not John? Maybe that was something a lot of people did in that time, but it was kind of strange to me. And it got me to thinking, well, John is one of these unisex names that kind of sounds like, it's basically the male version of the name Joan or Jean. And so I started playing around with various different connections there, and adding, there's a lot of Hoovers. Probably we want to have one that's associated with the FBI. And lo and behold, taking the J and adding an A to make it Ja, and placing it this way, Ja-hoover FBI. Now, what does Ja-hoover sound like? Well, Ja is yes in German, and Ja-hoover is basically the way the FBI came after he got a hold of it. He was obeyed like God Almighty, not only by the FBI, but by pretty much every other part of the government that they had dirt on. And that was the primary focus of the FBI from the time he took it over. Not to reduce crime. They would set up high-profile stings and so forth to pad their reputation and step in to cases where the local police, the state, the state sheriffs, the marshals, U.S. Marshals, had already taken care of a situation, and then they would step in at the very last minute and take over the case, and it would show in the mainstream news, FBI cracks another case, or usually they would actually call out, J. Edgar Hoover saves the world from Dillinger, or whatever. And this was, basically the beginning of true lies in American politics, carried through to the media, because another of the key efforts that Hoover and his clan, I would call it a clan, executed within the FBI. They gathered dirt on everybody, especially public figures, politicians, leaders of universities and corporate organizations, and especially figures in the media that they could basically either gather dirt on or entrap them into. And that was a large part of how the FBI operated. And much of it was known at the time, but nobody was really brave enough to do anything about it. So, interestingly enough, Hoover, although Hoover is not necessarily what you would associate as a Germanic name, it is a Germanic background. And this man was German on both sides, Swiss actually, and had pretty close ties with the old country, as it would turn out. And if you know much about Switzerland during World War II, it was on paper neutral, but in fact was a convenient neutrality, kind of like Hong Kong used to be. When it was given back to the CCP, it was supposedly still run as a separate system and still functioning under its own government, but in fact they were infiltrating it and making it part of their base of operations. And there's now pretty strong evidence that that's what happened in the World War II era with the Vatican, who had close ties with the Sicilian mafia, of course. So at any rate, I thought, well, Ja-hoover makes sense. And then, lo and behold, it struck me as Ja-hoover. This is a big thumbs up to God, to represent in gematria this beast of a man that way. And in English gematria, in fact, you get the number of the beast that way, 666. Interestingly enough, in simple gematria, you get 111, which is 1/6 of a beast. Kind of a connection that I drew from what I saw in Xi Jinping's gematria, which I wish I could show you, but the internet's not behaving well to allow me to pull up that page again. I'm lucky to be able to have any of the pages that it still won't come up. So you can look at this IRL up here and you can find it for yourself. And let's give it one more shot to load. Okay, give me the goodies this time. You see, this is what it does to me. You must log into this network before you access the internet. I've never done that before in this ISP that we have in Indonesia. So just happened this morning. So it must be a sign of the time. Yeah, that's not coming up. But at any rate, this is, interestingly enough, the Hebrew gematria 1511, which you will see, okay, if I have the 5 and I add it to 1, that makes a 6. If I add it to that one, it makes a 6. And if I add it to that one, it makes a 6. So it really kind of fits from a Hebrew gematria standpoint too, which is the characteristic I found of finding a match. Now, my theory about this is these are not the primary beasts. These are secondary beasts, because as I've told you about how the Messiah game works for the good guys, it works the same for the bad guys. They're having a competition, if you will, to be the beastiest beast at the feast and earn favor in the adversary's eyes. thinking that they will become one of the archdemons of the adversary's team, which is made up, as I've told you before, of hive minds. Basically, a group of high-level demonic angels at the top, supporting the queen, and then basically using others that they can attract into their hive mind to do their dirty work. Basically using them for their weaknesses, their addictions, their passions, if you will, their attractions, their emotions, to do the dirty work of the adversary. Because the adversary doesn't understand karma, well, or is playing under a different version of karma, where you could outsource karma. And that's actually a good way to explain it, is that the adversary is working outside of the current version of karma we're testing in this test tube called Earth, in this species called humanity. And the adversary has a certain ability to influence, but they can only work through their agents. They can't send their top flight demons in personally. Okay, and that's why you need a lot of beasts to make this thing happen. The old prophecy about one beast or 3 beasts was based upon an understanding of how the game worked back 2,000 years ago. Now maybe they knew how the new game was set up, and certainly a lot of Jesus' preaching was saying, hey, something's going to be different in the future. Many rooms in heaven. Okay, but a lot of what was put out as Christian propaganda was reinforcing old myths and undoing much of what a real Messiah would have been preaching about. And a lot of that got caught up into Catholic dogma, and which serves the power of the Catholic Church, the power of the Pope, who has self-proclaimed to be God's representative on earth. Well, okay, the cardinals elect him. So the cardinals are God on earth, if you will. They're trying to do something like, I tell you, is organizing in the way God organizes. But who elects the cardinals? Who selects the cardinals? The Pope does. How does that system provide any sort of balance of power? And, the cardinals or the Pope appoint the bishops, and the bishops appoint the priests, and from there on down, it's all corrupt as hell. Now, there's wonderful, great people in the church. Don't get me wrong. In every religion, there are people that actually worship God, but there are a lot of servants of the adversary. Well, let's get back to J. Edgar Hoover here. So I just showed you how I did the gematria to show where I was going it. Let's look at his Wikipedia page and see if we can find anything else. I didn't really find much in his background other than the fact that his family on both sides kind of led back to strong connections in Switzerland. But didn't go back very far, and I couldn't find any details about his background. Oh my goodness, sorry. Let's see, early life. So the only knowledge we have about his background is his mother was Anna Marie Scheitlin. That's where I first made the connection that, oh, this guy is of a Germanic background. When I went digging into his genealogy, I discovered, well, it's Swiss, which is, of course, Germanic too. Switzerland actually has 3 languages, German, French, and Italian, but most of the people there are of a Germanic background, at least the native Swiss. Dickerson Naylor Hoover, digging back in his family, turns out they're Germans too. And like second generation, his claim to fame was the chief of the printing division of the United States Coast and Geodetic Survey, which an interesting job to have as a government service, because that would have had a lot of power to redefine maps and to basically probably dictate what maps went into the official archive and what were hidden somewhere deeply. So I'm guessing old Dickerson Naylor Hoover was a servant of the adversary too, and that's where the connection came. This is my contention that these are members of basically a Luciferian, Lilithian Messiah line, anti-Messiah line, Antichrist line. Just like God's team anoints the ones who are going to carry the torch for God and karma, the adversary's team anoints the ones that are going to carry the torch for Lucifer and Lilith. Not the best form of Lucifer, but the dark form of Lucifer that likes things the way they are and doesn't want God to wake up from deep sleep. So they can keep playing this basically cat and mouse game of Whack-a-Messiah, alternating between paternalistic civilization and maternalistic civilization, which is how they keep the struggle going at the highest level and tie it to sex, basically. And definitely sex is a huge piece of what's going on right now. Okay, so no further information on his mother, but that's the lowdown on his father. He was born present site of Capitol Hill United Methodist Church. So right in D.C., right in the middle of all that. If you lived in the middle of all that, that's probably understandable because of his father's position. But basically, at that time, the bureaucracy was very aristocratic. They didn't have titles like Lord and Lady, but there was already kind of a Washington insider vibe building up there. And that's when, the traditions of, well, if you got to go to Yale and join the Skull and Bones Club, if you want to get anywhere, or Harvard and, etc. This is definitely in that era where all that stuff started to emerge. That's interesting. He did not have a birth certificate filed upon his birth, although it was required in 1895 in Washington. Interesting. Now, this is really interesting because it is the case that the messiahs and the anti-messiahs often have disputed parentage, as you know from the Christ story. Joseph was not Jesus' father. Some think that Mary was impregnated by God himself, or others believe it was a Roman soldier. There's quite a bit of debate on that score among biblical scholars. So interesting that Hoover did not have a birth certificate, even though it was required in the year that he was born. Another little piece of the puzzle that says this guy might not be exactly who you think he was. Hoover's was not filed until 1938. What's special about that year? He was 43 years old before he got a birth certificate. Well, if you know, 1938 was the year basically that World War II started. Technically it started in 1939 with the invasion of Poland by both the Soviet Union and Germany. But in 1938 was basically when most of the sane world knew that war was going to be inevitable and was already preparing for having to deal with the German problem and, frankly, the communist problem. Let's see, lived his entire life in Washington, D.C., Central High School, participated in ROTC, good little boy. During debates on the debating team, he argued against women getting the right to vote and against the abolition of the death penalty. So two positions that wouldn't have made him very popular now. The school newspaper applauded his cool, relentless logic. Hoover stuttered as a boy, which he later learned to manage by teaching himself to talk quickly, a style that he carried through his adult career. A fast-talking devil, isn't he? He eventually spoke with such ferocious speed that stenographers had a hard time following him. And if you know much about how court recorders and reporters worked in those days, there were not ways to record things and play it back. They had basic recording equipment eventually, but it wasn't really commonplace and it wasn't very good. So you typically had court recorders and stenographers actually just listening and writing down as they listened. And fast talking was a good way to avoid getting called out on something you said. Because it would say, "What did you just say?" And then that gives the person time to rephrase, restate themselves, so that it's not clear what exactly they said. And you could actually get two messages out, one that you would say slowly to the recorder and one that you would say fast to the audience. And if you've heard any of Hitler's speeches, there are times where it's like that, or when he's talking to a group. He was a very fast talker too when he wanted to be, or he could slow down. 18 years old when he accepted his first job, entry-level position as messenger in the orders department at the Library of Congress. The library was half a mile from his house. The experience shaped both Hoover and the creation of the FBI profiles, as Hoover noted in the 51 letter. This job trained me in the value of collating material. It gave me an excellent foundation for my work in the FBI, where it has been necessary to collate information and evidence. Now, if you can imagine, the orders department at the Library of Congress was basically responsible for buying up new books and putting them into the library. Well, you can imagine in that department that Hoover might be able to make contact with authors, with professors, with all sorts of people who wanted to have their material in the Library of Congress, and might get a chance to develop relationships with him, if you can imagine. So I'm sure it was very helpful to him in his later career. Hoover obtained a Bachelor of Laws from George Washington University Law School. He was a member of the Alpha Nu chapter of Kappa Alpha Order, and an LLM, whatever that is, in 1970 from the same university. While a law student, Hoover became interested in the career of Anthony Comstock, the New York City postal inspector, who waged prolonged campaigns against fraud, vice, pornography, and birth control. Interesting. Why would he be so interested in that Anthony Comstock? Well, let's see. He had a very strong feeling against women having the right to vote, and thought the death penalty was a wonderful thing. So maybe he thought, if I find somebody who's got similarly crusader ideas towards certain things, I can see what they did to get ahead and emulate them, or maybe take their position. And if you know how the adversaries' minions work, their competition really is the others in their organization. They're trying to impress the boss enough that they move up the chain until they get to a place where they've got to basically outdo the next one up on the rung. This is how hive mind management works. If you get above the level of being a drone or a soldier, a worker or a soldier, you've got to get into the royalty. In mob terms, it's called being a made man. You're suddenly part of the inner circle. You're one of the candidates that is vying for becoming a godfather at some point. But you have to, of course, basically get there by unseating another godfather or demoting them, which demotion in satanic organizations rarely happens. It's usually you succeed by assassinating the next one above you or getting somebody else to assassinate them for you, which is the clever way of moving up in a satanic organization. Okay, so he probably studied Anthony Comstock, looking at, well, okay, I see somebody who succeeded in the way I want to succeed. What did he do, and how could I knock him off of his perch as U.S. Postal Inspector? Now, one of the background things here that you should be aware of is that the post office was pretty closely tied with law enforcement. If you know that the mail used to be delivered by stagecoach, because there weren't trains that ran everywhere. It was not a very highly automated system, and so the postal mail was taken by stagecoach, which Santa Fe Stage Line, Wells Fargo originally started out as a stagecoach service who delivered mail and parcels and people to places that weren't serviced by rail. So this also is how this ties into the financial system that developed in the United States. Very closely related to mail, very closely related to the financial system and law enforcement. Because the law enforcement on the stages was hired by the company who ran the stages, Wells Fargo. So they had a very close tie there, and kind of their era's revolving door was between, basically privately contracted stage drivers moving up to becoming marshals and higher order people in the law enforcement arena, which eventually led up to the federal level, largely through postal connections. And interesting how, we have this term going postal. Somebody who starts attacking their own workers. A lot of interesting things kind of converge in this talk. Okay, so he, even after getting his degree, he was hired by the Justice Department. There's a connection to another troubled area of the United States government, to work in the War Emergency Division. Interesting area to work in. Around 1917, the end of World War I. He accepted the clerkship 1970, age 22, job paid $990 a year, and was exempt from the draft. Well, that's convenient, so he didn't have to go to World War I because he took a job in the Justice Department, which was a very common dodge in that time, by the way. The privileged class, especially in D.C., would take these cushy little jobs in the federal government to avoid the draft and still claim that they were serving their country. Now, the War Emergency Division, that sounds like a real efficient organization in the last year of a war, doesn't it? I'm sure they weren't doing much war emergency work in that period. They were probably setting up for trying to basically perpetuate whatever hierarchy they developed, and that's a common problem with governments. You want to make a temporary job that might exist because of a war permanent. So definitely some things going on here that tie together with all sorts of other patterns that the U.S. government fell into after this time. Hoover soon became the head of the division's Alien Enemy Bureau. Interesting. Authorized by President Woodrow Wilson after the beginning of World War I to arrest and jail allegedly disloyal foreigners without trial. Oh, this sounds rather Gestapo-ish, doesn't it? He received additional authority from the 1917 Espionage Act. Out of a list of 1,400 suspicious Germans, notice the connection, Swiss background, his family closely related to Swiss Germans. In the U.S., the Bureau arrested 98 and designated 1,172 as arrestable. Now, interesting. Why would you designate somebody as arrestable instead of just arresting them? This is where Hoover made bank later on. He's got all this dirt on people that he could drag out later on. And if you've ever studied Hoover in depth, you know that his private files were, it's almost comical what happened after Hoover's death, because there was this mad scramble to get his private files, either to hide them or to reveal them, and that's another story, but you can read about it in the biography. Okay, so in August 1919, 24-year-old Hoover became head of the Bureau of Investigation's new General Intelligence Division, also known as the Radical Division, because its goal was to monitor and disrupt the work of domestic radicals. America's first Red Scare was beginning, and one of Hoover's first assignments was to carry out the Palmer raids. So you can imagine, if you are part of an organization tasked with stopping communism, you're probably going to get in pretty deep with communists. And the other thing that occurred to me that we need to be reminded of, in especially election years, is a very common phrase that was created about this era. Nobody knows the exact origination of this phrase. If you can't beat them, join them. But somewhere it's been traced back as far as the 1930s. A short common saying or phrase that particularly gives advice and shares a universal truth. If you can't beat them, join them usually means if you cannot defeat your opponent, you may as well join forces with them in order to have at least a modicum of control of the situation. It also means that you can adopt the methods your opponent is using in a situation, but not necessarily the goals. And this is a lot of what happens in politics, is somebody starts throwing dirt, somebody starts playing dirty, and the stupid reaction is to, okay, you're going to do that, I'm going to throw a mud pie at you. And that just drags everybody down into the muck of corruption. And this basically wonderful little universal phrase has been used to justify all kinds of corruption. It is a satanic proverb. I dare you to challenge that assertion. Okay, so this was very much in people's minds during the early communist era, which was also when fascism was taking form around the world. And this guy was right in the middle of all that, involved in arresting radicals. Now, this wasn't particularly tied to communism at the time. It was actually all sorts of radicals who had more fascist or communistic inclinations. There wasn't really much difference between the two, and in fact, the Nazis was short for National Socialists. So they were just basically communists who didn't want their religion to be a global thing, but wanted it to be a thing that was administered by the chosen people, the Aryan supermensch, which I'm sure Hoover had some pretty close ties to. which is why I found that match of Ja-hoover FBI to be the 666 of the beast. Okay, so he and his chosen assistant, George Bruch, monitor a variety of U.S. radicals with the intent to punish, arrest, or deport those whose politics they decided were dangerous. Targets during this period included blah, blah, blah. The Emma Goldman is a very famous one there. I want to do some more research down that path. And future Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter. Austrian-born. Justice of the Supreme Court till 1962. Noted advocate of judicial restraint. That might not be much a bad guy. However, Hoover maintained he was the most dangerous man in the United States. Interesting. In 1920, 25-year-old Edgar Hoover was initiated as a Freemason. Went on to join the Scottish Rite, in which he was made a 33rd degree Inspector General Honorary in 1955. And this, again, ties back to some interesting connections we know between the Masonic order, at least the higher orders of the Masons, and some pretty shady characters in governments. 33rd degree, that's pretty high. Is that as high as you can go? Pretty close. Okay, in 1921, Hoover rose in the Bureau of Investigation to deputy head. And in 24, the Attorney General made him acting director. Interesting, acting director. So he was just like a temporary guy put there. And later on, they appointed him as the permanent director, partly in response to allegations that the prior director, William J. Burns, was involved in the Teapot Dome scandal. Interesting. It's a bribery scandal, which involved oil reserves and so forth, probably worth delving into if you're into history. One can imagine that this young man Hoover probably had some hand in discrediting the man that he was going to replace. Cal Coolidge, Silent Cal. That's another person that doesn't get studied enough. Okay, so when Hoover took over the Bureau of Investigation, had approximately 650 employees, including 441 special agents. Hoover fired all female agents and banned the future hiring of them. Can you imagine anyone doing that nowadays? Now, why would he do that? Well, it's been stated before he didn't believe that women should have the right to vote. It sure seems like he's got it out for women. Why would that be? Must be somehow related to his relationship with his mother or his relationship to the other sex. And this ties into what we learn about him later. In fact, it's been revealed, and I think if you watch the movie about J. Edgar, that he was a transvestite and also gay. So he would be what would be known now as a trans man. Probably if they'd been available in his time, he would have gotten some sort of operation. Hoover was sometimes unpredictable in his leadership. He frequently fired bureau agents, singling out those he thought looked stupid, like truck drivers, or whom he considered pinheads. He also relocated agents who had displeased him to career-ending assignments and locations. Melvin Purvis. Now, this is an interesting story. Melvin Purvis was like the top agent at the FBI, the one who actually did something, who was doing good work. He captured or killed a number of bank robbers, such as Babyface Nelson, John Dillinger, Pretty Boy Floyd. He was the FBI's golden boy. Purvis was one of the most effective agents in capturing and breaking up 1930s gangs. And it is alleged that Hoover maneuvered him out of the Bureau because he was envious of the substantial public recognition Purvis received. In December 1929, Hoover oversaw the protection detail for the Japanese naval delegation. who were visiting Washington, D.C., on their way to attend negotiations for the naval treaty. Interesting opportunity to possibly be approached as a spy for the Japanese. I don't know if there's anything there, but I wouldn't put it past this character. In the early 1930s, criminal gangs carried out large numbers of bank robberies in the Midwest. They used their superior firepower and fast getaway cars to elude local law enforcement agencies and avoid arrest. Many of these criminals frequently made newspaper headlines across the United States, including John Dillinger, blah, blah, blah. The robbers operated across state lines, and Hoover pressed to have their crimes recognized as federal offenses, so that he and his men would have the authority to pursue them and get the credit for capturing them. Initially, the Bureau suffered some embarrassing foul-ups, in particular when Dillinger and his co-conspirators in fact, his job was kind of on the line because they failed spectacularly. And he pulled out all stops and assigned his special agent Melvin Purvis, the director of operations in the Chicago office, to take care of it. And this guy was pretty successful. They killed John Dillinger. You remember there's a song I like to sing, "The Night Chicago Died." That's about this night that they knocked off Dillinger and broke up his organization, which was the primary gang in control of Chicago at the time. Hoover was credited for overseeing several highly publicized captures or shootings of outlaws and bank robbers, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so this is part of him building up his own reputation at the expense of his people, which is another very satanic characteristic of leaders, to take credit for others' work. If you know of a leader doing that, you can be pretty sure that they are, if not under the influence of the adversary, definitely a target for the adversary. Okay, 1935 it was renamed the FBI. Blah, blah, blah. And this is when the FBI became sort of its own science organization, the foundation of their own laboratory for forensic science, which probably got them into contact with a lot of people in the pharmaceutical industry. A lot of money to be made by tampering with evidence. Became preeminent in domestic intelligence thanks in part to changes made by Hoover, such as expanding and combining fingerprint files in the Identification Division, filing the largest collection of fingerprints to date. Well, who else has been collecting, even better than fingerprints, DNA evidence? The Chinese Communist Party. And need I note that Xi Jinping has been linked to being a beast as well, a bigger beast, I think, than Hoover. So, laboratory division established to examine and analyze evidence found by the FBI. Also to plant and tamper with evidence, what they've been caught at a number of times. American Mafia, 1930s, persistently designed Hoover persistently denied the existence of organized crime. Despite numerous organized crime shootings, as mafia groups struggled for control of the lucrative profits derived from illegal alcohol sales during Prohibition, and later for control of prostitution, illegal drugs, and other criminal enterprises. Many writers believe Hoover's denial of the mafia's existence and his failure to use the full force of the FBI to investigate it were due to mafia gangsters Meyer Lansky, interesting fellow, and Frank Costello's. You see The Godfather? That was basically about a fictional account of this era. Possession of embarrassing photographs of Hoover in the company of his protege, FBI Deputy Director Clyde Tolson, who, you remember, was featured here at the racetrack with his bosom buddy, Edgar. Okay, other writers believe Costello corrupted Hoover by providing him with horse racing tips, passed through a mutual friend, gossip columnist Walter Winchell. Interesting character. Basically one of the first of the yellow press kind of journalist who was made a living out of digging up dirt, and basically with his friend Herbert Hoover pressuring them to pay off or be exposed in this guy's column. And they got a lot of dirt on celebrities because this guy specialized in celebrity gossip. And this track connection, okay, Hoover had a reputation as an inveterate horse player and was also known to send special agents to place $100 bets for him, which you can imagine gave him opportunities to tie into the money laundering operations of said places. Man, it's just so obvious what was going on here. Hoover once said the Bureau had much more important functions than arresting bookmakers and gamblers. Interesting. Now, if you know anything about gambling, you will know it is one of the worst addictions. It is a soul addiction. It's much worse than a substance addiction because it is one that is tied to the mind. The gambler's addiction is the same addiction that drives people to organized crime, basically. I was just watching something about an interview. Who was doing the interview? Oh, I think it was the Jordan Peterson interview with the guy that had started the dark web and was now working as on the other side, helping people expose and identify cybercrime. Talking about how he got started, a large factor of it was gambling. And the gamble of seeing what you could get away with is a huge attraction to people who become career criminals of any kind. It's that gambling aspect that makes it exciting, that gives you that adrenaline rush that many people become addicted to and pulls them into the abyss of sin. Okay, although Hoover built the reputation of the FBI arresting bank robbers in the 1930s, his main interest had always been communist subversion. And during the Cold War, he was able to focus the FBI's attention on these investigations. Now, interestingly enough, that was a main focus of the Nazi Party in Germany, which had very close ties with the U.S. government. And in fact, many of the top financiers, the top politicians of the U.S. government were openly supportive of the Nazi Party until World War II broke out and they couldn't maintain those sentiments anymore. They were actively supporting Hitler and his idea that, well, I have to do this because I'm fighting communism. And if I don't build up the arms of Germany again, the Stalinists are going to overrun Europe. This was a common justification for letting Hitler do what he was doing for so long. From the mid-1940s through the mid-50s, he paid little attention to criminal vice rackets such as illegal drugs, prostitution, extortion, and flatly denied the existence of the mafia in the United States. In the 50s, evidence of the FBI's unwillingness to investigate the mafia became a topic of public criticism. After the Appalachian meeting of crime bosses in 1957, Hoover could no longer deny the existence of a nationwide crime syndicate. In fact, Cosa Nostra's control of the syndicate's many branches operating in criminal activities throughout North America prevailed and was heavily reported in popular newspapers. How Hoover created the Top Hoodlum program and went after the syndicate's top bosses throughout the country. Now, if you studied this era, you know that either Hoover was incredibly inept and his organization, or they were riddled with mob assets, because rarely did anybody get caught. And usually when somebody did get caught, before they could ever get their case to trial, all of the star witnesses had been wiped out, despite having been put on some sort of witness protection program. All kinds of movies about this era, and many of them true. Hoover was concerned about what he claimed was subversion, and under his leadership, the FBI investigated tens of thousands of suspected subversives and radicals. According to critics, Hoover tended to exaggerate the dangers of the alleged subversives and many times overstepped his bounds in the pursuit of eliminating that perceived threat. Well, now if you see the McCarthy era from this point of view, you can imagine that Hoover didn't give a damn about communism. He was in it for basically elevating the FBI. And all of the other deep state organizations basically grew out of trying to, if you can't beat them, join them, to what Hoover was doing with the FBI. So the CIA started becoming the same kind of organization. The Justice Department started becoming the same organization. And the military started becoming the same kind of organization. It all started with what Hoover did with the FBI, because he was planting spies in all these organizations, and the only way to combat them was basically to join. Because if you exposed what was going on, probably Hoover had some dirt on you, and you would be the one that went down. That was going on in the government. It was going on in organized crime. It was going on with foreign countries, Japan. And it'd be interesting to find out what sort of involvement Hoover had with the lead up to Pearl Harbor. Okay, let's see. This is interesting. William J. Hudley, Justice Department prosecutor, joked that Hoover's investigations had actually helped the American Communist movement survive, as Hoover's informants were nearly the only ones that paid the party dues. So they were going after small fry, going after useful idiots, and not touching the people that really were subverting the U.S. government. Due to the FBI's aggressive targeting, by 1957, CPUSA membership had dwindled to less than 10,000, of whom some 1,500 were informants for the FBI. So basically, by targeting the Communist Party, they made it go underground. And that's where the communists have been in the U.S. ever since. Sleeper cells, secret organizations. Only recently, in the last couple of decades, have they come out and shown their true colors with organizations like BLM, Antifa, Democratic Socialists of America, and they are the ones actively organizing these peaceful protests that are destroying our cities now. This all was a result of the satanic efforts of this one man, this one miserable, sick transvestite. And I know I'm going to get attacked. I'm going to get banned. I'm going to say it. This was a sick man, and every bit of his sickness revolved around him hiding his sexual proclivities. And figuring, well, okay, if I have to hide mine, I'll make sure everybody else has to hide theirs too. And this is essentially where the trafficking set of the Jeffrey Epstein class started. Everybody's got to have something on everybody else so they can feel safe. What better way to do that than get people involved in satanic rituals, in illegal activities, and recording them doing it? That all started with J. Edgar Hoover. Ja-hoover FBI, Mr. Beast of America. Yes, we have already had America's beast. It was the J. Edgar Hoover. And a lot of other beasts are trying to outdo him, using the same tactics. Maybe one of them will be the top dog, be the real beast. That's how it works. They're all, until the event is over. The beast side of the equation, the Antichrist team, the team of the adversary, are climbing all over themselves, trying to get higher in their hierarchy, so that they are not one of the hive mind minions, one of the soldiers, one of the drones, but they're actually one of the beautiful people at the top who get the benefit of all the crimes the rest of the hive mind is committing. And they have many hive minds who operate independently and are actually even each other's enemies. That's the sick thing about what's going on, and you see it in the deep state, where you've got the CIA arrayed against the FBI, and they're against the military, and the different services in the military are playing against each other, trying to maintain their budgets, trying to justify growth in their organization at the expense of other organizations, and all at the expense of the American taxpayer. And they don't really have the American people's best interest in heart. They are serving their own corrupt organizations. Not all of them. There are great Americans in all of these organizations, but they have been riddled by servants of the adversary. And as long as nobody goes in and cleans this up, it's going to keep on that way until the country is destroyed. And they're on the verge of destroying our country. There are hive minds in every echo chamber of social media, being more and more militarized to want a civil war. And any decent candidate that everybody could get behind, like Ron DeSantis, is being demonized by every side as, oh, how could you possibly support him? You need to support the Trump man. If you don't, you're disloyal. Hell! I thought in the United States it was a good idea for everybody to have a chance to run and to present their platform and let the voters decide. Not be forced to drop out of the primaries, or else, which we've seen a lot of since 2016. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Bernie Sanders fiasco, I was a Bernie Sanders supporter in 2016. Very, very avid supporter that followed politics very closely. I was living in, from Columbus to Connecticut at the time. I think during a lot of the lead up, I was in Ohio, and then by the time the election came, I was actually voting in Connecticut. So I saw what was going on from a number of states, because my my wife at that time was moving around a lot because she was in one of these management training programs, and spending so long here, so long there. So I got to see a lot of different states and politics during that era. Long story short, those of you who were watching closely at the Democratic National Convention, there was quite a big stir about unfairness in those elections, rigging of those elections, and screwing of Sanders supporters. Basically taking their donations that they thought were going toward the Sanders campaign and using them for Hillary Clinton. And in fact, now a lot of that stuff is coming out through the efforts of James O'Keefe and his OMG, O'Keefe Media Group, oh my God bunch, who exposed what was going on, basically a lot of money laundering going on with the super PAC that feeds, the main one that feeds the Democrats. What is it? Act Blue, I think they used to call it. They probably changed their name. That's pretty common among criminal organizations, and it is one of the things that makes it very difficult to track down the criminals who are associated with the Chinese Communist Party's military buildup and subversion and technology stealing operation, which the Bidens were absolutely involved in. Anybody who has seen what's on the Hunter Biden laptop with a brain knows that Biden is a criminal, a traitor to his country, has been for some time. Well, the first time Biden tried to run for president, he didn't last through 2 or 3 primaries. I don't think he lasted till the first primary, because people started pointing out his corruption. He's been corrupt as hell for as long as he's been in politics. He's been known as a yes man who will do anything that his handlers pay him. He's basically a sock puppet. Always has been, not just since he's been suffering from dementia. And people need to know that, and they weren't told that during the election. You have a whole bunch of people that think, oh, he's such a wonderful guy. Oh, thank goodness. Well, I'm not saying Trump was great either. He's controlled opposition. Many people aren't aware that Donald Trump didn't even have the idea to run for president until Hillary Clinton gave it to him. And the Democrats actually promoted Trump during the Republican primary in 2016. They spent money, the Democrats spent money getting Trump elected or nominated, because they thought he was going to be easier competition for Hillary. This is true, folks. You can do your own research and find it out. If you won't admit that, my God, you're marking yourself as a beast, as an NPC, a non-player character who's not smart enough to think for yourself and just follows whatever program is dumped into you. Okay, well, illegal wiretapping, this all ties into how Roosevelt himself was manipulated by Hoover. Probably had some effect on Roosevelt's conduct of the war, Roosevelt's conduct of the Depression recovery, etc., etc. Those of you who are familiar with Watergate, it's all about wiretapping. And somebody who had placed a wiretap, an illegal wiretap, in the Democratic National Headquarters, which is what took down Nixon. Now, if you look at the dates here, I mean, there's so much to go in here. I don't want to go on too long, but basically, a couple of things to point out was Hoover's involvement in the McCarthy era, which, as I told you, he's painted as an arch anti-communist, but many of the things he did actually encouraged people to turn and feel sorry for communists, real communist agitators who were definitely involved in Hollywood and who were selling communist messages. Absolutely. You look at the movies of that era, some of them were anti-communist and many of them were pro-communist. And for a while, pro-communism was a good thing because, oh, the Russians are our allies, right? This is how the adversary works, to divide people, to confuse people. There was no good guy between Germany and Russia. No good guys between fascists and communists. They're all bad guys. There's no lesser evil there, folks. And one thing we know about fascism and communism is it's all evil. It always ends up bad. It always ends up concentrating more power in the hands of few people. Hoover is one of the tricky ones who always stayed in control, but in the sidelines. He could get whatever he wanted done without actually being involved. He would just lean on whoever he needed to lean on to get what he wanted. He could lean on presidents. And in fact, he was still in this office when Kennedy was assassinated. And you know how so many people say, oh, the CIA must have assassinated Kennedy and all of these conspiracy theories? Let me tell you, I believe it was J. Edgar Hoover's FBI that did it. And they pinned it, they framed the CIA so that if anything ever came out, well, we can let them go with the CIA story and keep the FBI clean. Prove me wrong. At any rate, eventually the old bastard died. More thing I'll cover before, I think I've said about all I want to say, probably all I'm going to be allowed to say on the subject. I'm sure people have researched every one of these things to death and come to their own conclusions about Hoover. And one of the saddest things I came across, I was looking for pictures of Hoover and his partner, Clyde Tolson. The only one I could find that really presented them in a more couple-ish fashion was this picture taken in their 20th anniversary together. Almost looks like a wedding picture, doesn't it? You can't find this picture in the public domain, although presumably it must have been made public. No, you can only buy it for sale, made into a poster. Now, why would anybody want a poster of J. Edgar Hoover on his 20th anniversary with Clyde Tolson? Well, probably that would be very popular with the folks behind the woke movement, because he did more to encourage and enable and make people feel sorry for sick, demented people than anyone in American history, by not really coming down on the mob, by denying for so long that organized crime even existed. Oh, it's just your imagination. It's just some petty criminals. Oh, there's nothing wrong with gambling, nothing wrong with casinos, nothing wrong with running alcohol when alcohol is illegal. A lot of darkness was foisted by this guy, both from a standpoint of saying, well, this is okay, and from the standpoint of saying, well, oh, you can't do that. We can't have women in the FBI. This is a sick person whose sickness spread to an entire organization, to an entire government. His funeral was probably the most celebrated one in American history, and not because anybody missed the old bastard, but because they were finally free. They thought they were free of him, but that was just because they didn't understand that it was his files that were this guy's power. The information was the power. And information is spiritual energy. Thought is spirit. And his spirit is still captured in that sick organization called the FBI and all of the other organizations that they infected. The entire deep state of America is infected by the disease of this Antichrist of America. So J. Edgar Hoover, on your 20th anniversary, here's what I think of you and Clyde Tolson. May you burn in hell forever. Okay, well, that's probably a wrap for this one. If you liked it, like, share, subscribe, comment. If this one ever goes up, I hope it stays up. If it doesn't, I'll try to post it on Rumble. If it won't take there, I'll try to post it on X, because I think it's an important episode of my podcast. If you agree, well, maybe engage a little bit more. I'm starting to feel kind of lonely. Shadow banning kind of gets to you after a few years, and I've been pretty heavily shadow banned pretty much since around 2015, 2016, when I started getting pretty involved in politics. Well, I got involved I actually did a lot of canvassing for Obama in his second term, and I've seen that side of the story. I'll tell you a story before I finish up here. I was canvassing for Obama in Columbus, in one of these cookie cutter suburbia mansion areas that was heavily white. And I was paired with a black lady, lovely, wonderful black lady, to go canvassing. And we hit a few places. The people were not too friendly. I noticed that they were friendlier to me than her, and I eventually stopped basically going on my own and kind of shadowed her because I was kind of worried for her safety in that neighborhood. And sure enough, some guy came out with a gun and started threatening her. And, we extricated ourselves from that place, and I said, you know what? I don't think this is a safe neighborhood to canvass for Obama. And so we ended that day's canvassing, and I think I bought her lunch because she was kind of shaken by the whole thing. At any rate, you need to understand that there are not good guys among extremists. There are not good guys in any hive mind that is willing to kill for what they believe in. Sometimes you have to. When somebody's coming at you with a knife, when somebody's shooting at you with a gun, what are you going to do? You fight back or you die. Self-defense is different. It's very easy if you get under the control of an adversary hive mind to rationalize defense being offense. And that's essentially what's going on with the whole Hamas thing. And it is definitely affecting the whole world. They are militarizing Muslims all over the world. And it's the same media companies that are doing it who are militarizing the fake right and the fake left in the United States. They want to get people fighting each other. Why? Because that's how the adversary wins souls. They don't care if you kill each other as long as you're part of their hive mind. That gets you into their heaven. And they can work on your mind some more and turn you into basically drones and soldiers for their army that will come back and play adversary roles in the next day of creation. Well, they're not going to be coming to humanity after we get this mess cleaned up. They're going to be coming to the other species that are going to be trying to destroy humanity. And there are definitely species out there that are going to try to do that. Either destroy us spiritually or physically. That's what the adversary has always done, and they're not going to stop doing it just because we finished day 7 of creation. We're just done with the testing phase of this experiment. We're still sorting out souls. That's what this universe is for. If you remember my previous stuff, or if this is the first episode, this universe is Lucifer's universe. This is his home turf. And he's not a priori a bad guy. He's learned a lot from this experience of being the master of this universe. This universe is purgatory. It is where we test souls. And all thoughts are souls. Just manifested in a form sometimes. So a human soul is the idea of who you are. And you're testing very new elements of that idea. That's why we choose an incarnation, to test out, well, could I be this? What would I be like in this situation? What can I learn about myself? How can I grow from it? And that takes good and bad dimensions. Lucifer trains the adversary's troops just like Lucifer trains God and karma's troops. Kind of a nonpartisan character in all this, not a good guy or a bad guy, just a tester. Ultimately, I think Lucifer is on God's side, but really doesn't want to let loose on any of the power that being the master of this special universe affords him. And that's how Lucifer's gotten the satanic identity, although most of the real evil is done by the adversary, and the adversary is not Lucifer. It is Lilith, his child, actually. Sibling, viewed from another viewpoint. This is the real evil one. This is the one that wants to foil the plan, that is the enemy of God and karma. Lucifer just plays both sides because he likes the power he has over souls of both teams while they're playing in his universe. And this is why day 7 of creation has gone on so long, because Lucifer kind of plays both sides. So does Borg, the supplier of the NPCs. Between Lucifer and Borg, they've kept this game going for so long that everybody has forgotten what was going on. And, well, not everybody, but many people don't know what a Messiah is. Don't believe in a Messiah. Don't believe that God will ever incarnate again and wake up fully and end this testing phase of this little experiment. But in fact, that has happened. And now those who know about it are positioning for the next phase of this experiment, which is going to be, like I said, you might call it spiritual Star Trek. We're going to stop seeing these evil souls incarnate in humanity, or they will be recognized more quickly by a humanity that has more spiritual awareness. But the battle we have right now is whether humanity as a species is going to play for the adversary or for God and karma's team. And this is a tug of war going on in every heart that hasn't made a decision. Because it doesn't matter if nobody survives from this planet. The game will go on. The game will go on in this universe, and the souls playing it will be returning to this universe if they want to keep on playing the game, or they will be going to whatever spiritual universe they happen to get sent to and try to land a permanent position, become one of their angels or one of their demons, become one of their research staff or whatever they do in that universe, depending on what its specialty is. This is what we're going through right now. And when you make your decision, that's when you die, you have to make a decision. You're going to go through the real death experience. If you've already identified very closely where you need to go, you're going to be sent there immediately. That's this last phase of testing we've been going through, which is called the Mandela effect. It's basically transmigration of souls in a mid-incarnation. So you don't have to wait till they die to send them to the heaven or hell they deserve. If they have reached kind of a critical goodness or badness or identification, then they will be automatically sent to where they belong. In fact, they've been doing that, sending you to your universe to do things that don't fit with the plan. That's how we have free will, and we can still have a plan. If you take a step too far off the string of God's plan, you fall out to another universe, either the God's spiritual universe that you identified with and become one of their angels or devils, or into your own universe, which you're not necessarily aware of, but where it's basically a parallel to the prime universe, where whatever actions you were going to take that weren't allowed in the prime universe are taken. And then if it doesn't really affect too much, if it's recoverable, then you just come back to this prime universe after you either do or don't take the action that was critical. And you have your free will intact, you have your memories intact of what you chose to do. Your Merkaba takes the same shape it would as if you executed free will, because you did, just maybe not in the universe you thought you did. And this is where we get people so discombobulated about, gosh, yesterday it looked like this was here and now it's here. Or, I'm sure I left my keys there and they were in this drawer over here. How did they get there? How many times has that happened to you? It happens a lot. And this is evidence of everything that I'm telling you through this podcast. So anyway, I think we'll wrap up there. Like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you again next time on the Omnist Hour. Happy Karma.